In 1649, the Maryland General Assembly passed an act concerning religion, commonly referred to as the Maryland Toleration Act. Maryland was envisioned by George Calvert, Lord Baltimore, as a charter colony for English Catholics. It rose within the midst of the religious turmoil that racked the British Isles following the Protestant Reformation in the 16th and 17th centuries. Yet, its complete implications, purpose, and vision are a source of speculation due to the complexity of the document. At first, the act seems to have been put in place to protect the religious liberties of Catholics, primarily. The act was unique in that it tolerated all Christian denominations. Quote, it is tempting, therefore, to attribute this act as having the same, or at least a similar purpose to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Both documents forbid interference with free religious practice, which seems to indicate a shared purpose and similar worldview behind them. Additionally, it tempts one to imagine that the creators of the act, the Maryland General Assembly and Cecil Calvert, had a similar viewpoint on how religion should be placed within broader society. Yet further examination of the act put this viewpoint in jeopardy. This is where another approach that minimizes the act's impact on society and views it as a continuity of earlier acts comes into play. Far from promoting religious tolerance, the main purpose of the act seems to have been to establish what punishment other religions should receive. The act states that all non-Christians should be, quote, punished with death and confiscation or forfeiture of all his or her lands. Additionally, the act even regulates free speech concerning religion, particularly uttering against Mary and the apostles. Thus, it seems to be in continuity with earlier viewpoints on the relations between state and religion, since it places the state as having authority over the religion and having authority to kill those with religious viewpoints that it deems wrong. Thus, the questions arise: how can these seemingly contradictory ideas about the Maryland Toleration Act be reconciled? What was the act's purpose? The historian Gerald W. Johnson reconciled the seeming contradiction by stating that the first part of the act was unimportant, merely a, quote, disguise to hide the act's true purpose. Yet, as I will demonstrate, these sections can be viewed as a compromise and as a responsibility part of its rights and responsibilities. Really, the fundamental error with both approaches that were mentioned is that they looked at the Maryland Toleration Act from a modern perspective instead of by understanding the act's purpose, the full context surrounding its creation, the mindset and ideas of the time period, and the type of society it envisioned. The act cannot be looked at entirely from a perspective of complete religious freedom or separation of church and state, because the act does leave room for some violations of both principles, and it doesn't really work within that framework. Instead, it had a system that involved mutual toleration of denominations, shared non-negotiable core beliefs, and putting loyalty to the country and society above personal religious values. Although it is rooted fundamentally in a radically different perception of religion and government from the First Amendment, the act still created a vision of religion's place in society that was different from other colonies at the time. The act's purpose was to solve earlier questions surrounding Catholics' place in broader English society into writing by establishing a system in which Catholics and other denominations could exist in the same English colony. An act concerning religion opens with the following statement. This statement gives us the purpose of the document, which is to regulate all religious matters. This further dismisses connections with the First Amendment's ideology, which justifies toleration of religions by stating that no government can even concern itself with religious matters. This opening, however, places religious regulation front and center, and the toleration it grants can actually be seen as an extension of the government's power over religion, not a limitation of it. After all, the religious liberty focuses more on the punishing people who spoke ill of other denominations. Quote, whatsoever person who declare or denominate any person within this province to belonging idolater, Puritan, Independent, Presbyterian, Popish priest, Jesuited priest, Lutheran, Calvinist, or any other name or term in a reproachful manner relating to the matter of religion, shall for every such offense forfeit and lose the sum of 10 shillings. Here, name-calling other denominations is banned, demonstrating the act's purpose is for societal cohesion, not necessarily granting freedom or rights. Rather, the government regulates religious discourse in a way that would be conducive to the success of the colony. Another point on the first half of the act, which punishes other religions. If the act wanted to establish a societal model that was different from the church-state model seen before, it needed to provide at least some pretext for unity and some authority from which it derived its power. Here it finds the common Christian religion as a unifying force, which is why the non-Christians could not be tolerated. Comparison with other documents from the time period shows what the Maryland Toleration Act was trying to do. It laid out a new societal model. The Laws and Liberties of Massachusetts was written just a year before in 1648. It also dealt with the topic of how the government ought to deal with religion, but it was completely different. It threatens all those who oppose infant baptism with exile and prohibits men brought up and devoted to the religion and court of Rome, that is, Catholics. Dale's laws from the Virginia colony require all men and women to attend mandated church service on Sunday, while an act concerning religion only mandates that no work be done on Sunday. Clearly, there is a difference between Maryland's Toleration Act and the other early colonial laws. This brings to the question of what caused the difference if it was not our modern view of religious liberty. Maryland's Toleration Act emerged in a different context from the other laws in separate colonies. During the English Reformation, an argument for hostility towards Catholics was that Catholicism was inherently disobedient to the English monarchy. Queen Elizabeth articulated this idea in 1585 when she banished all members of the Jesuit orders. She said, quote, "Jesuits of late years come, not only to withdraw subjects from due obedience to Her Majesty, but also to stir up and move rebellion, sedition, and open hostility. This is the reason why Maryland could not enforce a state-mandated denomination. It was unable to. Any attempt to enforce Catholicism would be met with immediate scrutiny. The only way to simultaneously allow Catholics to exist freely in a colony and have control over it, and to assuage Protestants of their fear of Catholic oppression, would be to bar Catholics from exerting too much influence over Protestants. Far from being made primarily to protect Catholics, the Act's main purpose seems to be to ensure that no religion, including Catholicism, got the upper hand so that coherent society could be established." Conflicts around religion, specifically Protestant Puritanism, were rife during the establishment of the earliest colonies, which is what would give Catholics the chance to have their own colony when Lord Baltimore proposed a model in which religious harmony could be achieved. The conflicts would also factor into the choices made for the provisions of the Maryland Toleration Act. For example, in Virginia colony, Edward Sandys, a leader, was slandered as being a Puritan radical who supported sedition. Another case of religious tensions and slander in the early English colonies was the case of Roger Williams, who was expelled from Massachusetts due to religious dissent. He wrote the following request: "One can imagine that a monarchy would eventually get weary of having to judge through cases such as this, which is part of what made the promise of a society with religious cohesion so appealing. Lord Baltimore's deal was to establish a new colony based around a common Christian identity and loyal to the crown, where religious conflict would not be an issue that the central government would have to deal with. In summary, as a reward for taking on the responsibility of managing a colony without religious conflict, Catholics were rewarded with having the equal privileges and rights in the new colony. The Catholics of Maryland colony treated the responsibility of removing religious turmoil with extreme severity and reverence. Lord Baltimore's orders for the colony stated that Catholics should not try to offend Protestants. And he specifically points out Catholics not offending Protestants, not the other way around. This is markedly different from Puritan concepts and ways they governed their colonies, in which they placed their denomination as an example for others to follow. For example, with the Puritan city on a hill model. Far from being a Puritan city on a hill, Catholics would hide their religion, a responsibility seen as necessary for preserving the colony's peace. In a sense, the Act really did contribute to the First Amendment in some way, insofar as it provided hope that another societal model was possible, and sought an alternative to the church and state intrinsically tied together, in which the denomination of the rulers would be enforced. Thus, it seems that the Act's primary purpose was to demonstrate Catholic commitment to their responsibility of protecting Protestants and avoiding conflicts, rather than the primary purpose being to protect Catholics who already did not face persecution in Maryland, which was a Catholic colony. Instead of putting their denominational differences first over collaboration with other denominations, all Christians would be required to put their allegiance to the government and towards creating a better colony. They would sacrifice their personal religious feuds in order to relieve societal tension and push society forward. However, the Act compromised with the religious zeal of the inhabitants by ensuring that a united Christian identity would be maintained in the colony. The Act, in summary, created the only societal model that could reconcile the fears of religious tyranny, religious oppression, and religious chaos that were prevalent at the time.